Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kevin Fitzgerald, Executive Vice President and General Counsel, Pepco Holdings Incorporated.
Thank you. Appreciate everybody being here today. I've got a really fortunate job to host and moderate our technology panel. And before we got in here, typical with the technology panel, we had a technological issue. Our microphones didn't work. So I think we've got that worked out. But we appreciate, again, everybody being here today. Pepco Holdings serves the Mid-Atlantic region. We've got over 2 million customers. Over a million smart meters are deployed today. And in fact, we've started the process of working with big data and working with Oracle and with Silver Spring Networks, have started to use that data to reduce truck rolls for restoration and other outage activities. We believe we've just scratched the surface on this issue, and I'm honored to be up here today with the technology panel to talk about how we can go even further. First, I want to introduce Ed Abu, who is President and Chief Technology Officer of C3 Energy. To his left is Brad Gammons, General Manager of IBM Global Energy Utilities. And then we have Roger Smith at the end, who's Senior Vice President of Oracle's Utilities Practice. And I'd like them to talk a little bit about their practices, and then we'll get into a Q&A.
Well, thanks very much, Kevin, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. C3 Energy delivers an integrated smart grid software application. And we are focused on unlocking the value of the smart grid and investments that utilities are making. And what we do is we take data from across the energy value chain, generation, transmission, distribution, all the way to the customer, and subject it through our nuclear reactor equivalent analytics engine in the cloud, and deliver insights to customers so they can make more efficient use of energy, as well as grid operators so they can deliver power more efficiently and more reliably and through more resilience. The value that we have assessed associated with these technologies is a staggering $300 per customer on average per year. And we are delivering software to enable that, taking advantage of cloud-based technology.
Thank you. Kevin, thanks for allowing us to be here today. I'm Brad Gammons. I have responsibility for our energy and utility business across the world. IBM provides solutions across the complete energy value chain, so the supply side through distribution and transmission and customers, and also the ecosystem focused on electrical vehicles, distributed generation, and those domains also. We have about 3,700 people that focus on this globally. And we're also very focused on how OT and IT continues to come together to optimize that energy value chain.
Thanks. And I'm Roger Smith, and I do run the Oracle Utilities practice around the world. I've been in this industry now for 31 years. I've seen a lot of change. Actually, that's wrong. It's been 34 years. There's been a lot of change in this industry. What goes around comes around, and that's true. We've seen it come and go. And we'll talk about, I think, some of that in the panel today. I started off at 16 years at Southern Company, so I started in this industry on the utility side. In the last half of my career, I've been with companies like PwC, Black & Veatch, and now Oracle for the last 3 years. At Oracle, we also supply software, hardware, database. Most of you, if you're in the utility business, are a customer of Oracle somewhere along those lines. And we provide solutions from the meter all the way to the generation station. And those solutions today are critical to what we're going to talk about, which is the impact of technology on today's industry, to answer some of the questions or challenges that the opening speaker talked about.
Great. Well, our first question, I think, is a good one, which is particularly for me as an attorney. I'm not a technical guru, but of course I have to write contracts about them. But help me and help the audience understand, how is it that the technology that you all provide to the industry will provide value to our customers, the utility itself, and the communities we serve?
The technology fundamentally breaks down the information barriers that have been set up, or these systems that detect outages or that service the customer don't talk to each other fundamentally. And what the technology does is really integrates those systems and determines, by analyzing the data, what should the customer do to be more efficient. A great example of this is a system we deployed at Pacific Gas and Electric that analyzes meter data for business customers and does what we would refer to as a virtual audit of their facilities, and determines relative to others like them how efficient they are, and then which actions they should take to become more efficient. So that's an example of how technology can deliver value. On the grid side, identifying areas of power loss and restoring it more quickly. Technical losses, looking at those across the whole distribution transmission chain. Again, by integrating data, analyzing it, and delivering value is how technology can play a very important role.
Information technology, I think, always falls first into an enabler. And so the way we look at it is that we're, over the last number of years, many years now, been laying an information pipe on top of a physical pipe and bringing those two together so that you have more insight into the infrastructure itself. And to first do the basics is deliver the service reliably and very safely. And the more you know about that, and the more you know about that in real time and can look at it, analyze it, the better you can operate it. The more the regulator has transparency of all that going on and better information, the better they can make decisions on the value being created for the consumer. So there's value for both the utility and there's value for the public and the regulator, the more information that's available and the benefits being created. The consumers now look for more flexibility, and we know that when consumers get information, they make different choices and can make different choices. It may be that they want to get their supply differently by doing some of that themselves. They might want to use that supply to charge an electric vehicle. They want flexibility and understand the choices they're making and what impacts they have. And information helps with that. And we could probably go through a whole litany. But at the end of the day, technology is there to enable innovation and current operations and future operations.
Yeah, so Kevin, the way we look at it at Oracle is our solutions to do one of two things, and preferably both at the same time. And with the convergence of IT and OT, we see it more often. But the first thing is enhance operational efficiency. Utilities today around the globe, we see obviously constrained revenue streams, maybe with the exception of China, but utility revenue streams are constrained around the world. And so what utilities are being asked to do is do more with less, in essence. Reduce costs so that we can maintain margins at the same time your revenue stream is constrained. So what we try to offer on the OT side are things that can help utilities optimize the way they run their business. I think that's the regulatory expectation for any utility these days is operate as efficiently as you can, maintain your margins, because we don't want rate increases where we can avoid that. The second thing is on the customer side, and customers are demanding from utilities the same thing they demand from their Nordstrom store or from FedEx or from their healthcare provider or anyone else, and that is more information about product. What prices do I get product at? If I'm out, how long will I be out? Why am I out? When am I going to be back on? And not in general, but specifically. especially now as more of customers are home, working out of the office at home versus going into other offices. That's becoming more critical. So everything we try to do is to help utilities enhance that operational capability as well as enhance the customer experience. And frankly, because IT and OT do collide today, if you help operate the utility more efficiently, then ultimately that's going to benefit the customer, as Kevin talked about in outage management, for example, and the improvements that they've made in his utility by being able to tell the customer more specifically what the issues are, when they'll be back on, those types of things. So our spectrum is everything from the meter back to the actual power plants themselves, and making sure we can do both of those things.
Okay, so this is admittedly an IT and OT focused panel, but what do you see as the biggest game changers from a technological standpoint over the next 3 to 5 years and 5 to 10 years in the utility space?
Well, Kevin, are you talking about game changers that are happening in the marketplace? So, the distributed generation, large-scale renewables, all of those are going to basically change the game and the business model for utilities. What we can do as information technology providers is to really put in place an operating system, if you will, for the smart grid. And what that allows us to do is to deal with things like intermittency in the power supply. It allows us to handle distributed generation at the customer level, electric vehicle charging, all of the changes that are happening in load patterns and the supply, taking it from a much more predictable, what I'd say a hub and spoke model for distribution, into a model that's much more network in nature. And so that's lots of generation nodes, lots of small generation nodes, distributed generation everywhere. And so think of the technology that we're providing as really the operating system for the smart grid, and the applications that we're delivering on top of those as enabling the consumer to, the utility to engage the consumer to operate the grid, the utility to operate the grid much more efficiently and reliably.
I guess I'd start with things that aren't particularly IT. I do my job based out of Beijing, so I've lived in China for 4 years now. Thin film technology is a huge investment, and so as thin film technology continues to get better and the costs go down, you're going to have another very available technology to produce distributed supply with. And I think that could continue to accelerate distributed generation and all the potential opportunities and issues that come along with that. I think the same thing is happening with battery technology. And again, it plays to opportunities for the utility, also for auxiliary services, but also, again, continue to push to things like microgrids and to distributed generation as things become easier to access, to use, and to produce with and use more reliably. The third one that is one that we deal with every day, but I think it's going to affect this industry as we look for consumers to be more involved, is social business, or social media itself, is the ability to interact with your clients in a very real-time, interactive way. Consumers are showing that they're willing to give up a lot of personal information and things about themselves to get better service, and that kind of information can be very valuable to utilities for both new products and services, but also in how the network itself is maintained and services are provided. So I think the impact of social media is just seeing its early days in this particular industry, and it'll have even a deeper impact and in the way that the companies operate over time.
Yeah, so at the risk of being booed out of the room, I'm going to use the term big data. But I really do believe, people ask me, why did I leave working for utilities and join a company like Oracle? And I can tell you, I really do believe, this is probably an overstatement. I read an article the other day that said that big data might be the electricity equivalent of the 21st century. That may be a little bit of an oversell. But on the other hand, What it really is talking about is the fact that with the available information that we have from existing sensor technology on the OT side of the business today, you can fundamentally change the way you operate your utility, from the most basic maintenance functions to the most sophisticated operational functions around microgrids and how are you going to manage photovoltaic technology on your system and what happens to voltage control and all those things you have to worry about. That information is available, and you can optimize the way you run your business if you're paying attention. Now, that requires skill sets, frankly, that a lot of utilities don't have. Data scientists is one of those skill sets. It is very difficult for utility, frankly, to go out and compete for data scientists. So I really believe you're going to have to rely on companies like a C3 and Oracle and IBM and others to actually provide some of those skill sets, because it'll be a difficult market for most utilities to crack. So I think this whole big data thing, it is real. You can't ignore it. There are security issues and other things that are going to be addressed. But if you're not a player in that, if you don't recognize the impact that's going to have on fundamental operations of your business, you're going to be on the outside looking in. I think the next one is, and Brad touched on a little bit, is the storage issue. Storage will change the game in the utility business. How you manage storage, and is that a utility issue or a customer issue? We had that discussion with Kevin not too long ago, and I think it could be both. I think that storage costs have to come down for it to be affordable to the average consumer, but utilities can take great advantage of storage. I mean, storage puts a lot of renewables in the mainstream, right, that aren't now. It's tough to regulate renewables on your system today. Everybody knows that. Microgrids will help with that, but storage is a game changer. So I think that's a huge technology issue. We're looking at that with design of software to run microgrids, et cetera. And then the last one is the customer piece. And I think that where we've missed it in the customer piece in the past is expecting the customer to do a lot, right? To get in there and use pads and do all this stuff. Well, you know what? I don't know about you guys. The last thing I'm going to do when I get home, when I am home, is start worrying about what my rate is and do I mash this button or that button and look it up on the screen. Now, my kids get into that a little bit more than I do, but I just don't get into it that much. I think what's going to happen is that will all be invisible to the customer, the way technology is moving so quickly today. There'll be an aggregator device in your home. We can argue what that device is, but there'll be an aggregator in your device at home that reads all the sensor technology from every device in your house that has sensor technology in it and basically communicates with the utility about how to use electricity. Now, the question then becomes is what's the position of everybody in that game? Who plays what role there? But the regulatory environment's going to have to change. The utility environment will have to change. How we provide services to you and your customers will change if you're in the utility business. So I think those are kind of the three big categories as I see it.
Let's stay focused on the customer. There's a big dialogue in our company right now about that focus and how we want to remain committed and focused on the customer in everything we do. We think customer in everything we do. So take me behind the meter. Google buys Nest. Is that something that this industry needs to cede to Google and Nest, or is that something that you believe we should be a participant in?
I absolutely think the Pepco should be a participant in that.
Always looking to sell these guys. Always looking to sell.
And we're doing some pretty innovative work with one of the largest electricity providers on the planet to do exactly that, which is how do you get into the connected home, Kevin? And I think the utilities should play an active role in that. And it's about controlling, thermostats. It's about controlling the PV. It's about controlling charging times. It's about sending price signals into the home. And so I think the utility should extend into that domain. And you have increasingly more information about the customer in terms of, as I talked about, virtual audits to determine what equipment they have and what's running efficiently and what's not. As we send price signals over to actually help the consumer, to Roger's point, which is they shouldn't need to play around with dials. They should just do it. They should have a button for the eco mode or the savings mode or whatever it is, and press it, and everything should operate from that perspective. And I think the utilities should go along on that. and it should be a part of the business model for revenue growth and delivering services and value-added capabilities there. We're working with the utilities that are doing exactly that.
I think it's an interesting question. Is which way consumers are going to best want to interact, at least with the utility the way it looks today, and I think that's the question, is the utility today versus the utility in the future. Today, I think a customer that had a very complex smart home that had PV and a charging point and had smart appliances and a crazy thermostat of some kind, if it's not simple as Nest, would want to still know that they get reliable supply, that it's safe, that when I call, that I can call one place and I can figure out what the problem actually is. Because as you get more complexity, you also have more questions get asked, and the thing that always runs through my head is who's going to be responsible? Or will the call centers for the utility get flooded? Because where are you going to call if you've got a problem with your electricity? You know, did you do something wrong in your garage or on your rooftop? You're going to call the utility. So what does that do to the call center? So I think the regulators are going to have to really think through if they're going to allow utilities to take what they're really good at today, which is service, right? Understanding the system, and allow that to be applied more pervasively. Who's going to monitor all this stuff? It's on the system now. If I'm ever going to want to offer it as a service to aggregate, storage, right? Or if I'm going to want to do demand response, how do I do that in a way that it really can become a strong service, something that's maybe even dispatchable? That means you have to have very strong and reliable communication links. So I think there's big questions for regulators of how far do you let the utility go inside of the house so you have reliable service continue to be delivered. Then you get to the next question, does the utility become a new service provider? And do you allow them to enter into the fray of providing new services on the platform that they've built? The communication systems have all gone in. They're there now based off of regulated, investments for AMI networks and smart grids, right? This communication fabric that's been laid down. I think that's another big question that I think IT companies can talk about from our experiences of new business models and approaches, but it's got to be a dialogue very heavily with regulators to say, are you going to allow utilities to go there, and what will the value be if they stray away from, serving and providing a reliable system?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's a real conundrum, and I think the industry is pretty well split. I talk to CEOs regularly who say, I don't want any part of that. There are other other businesses out there that are better at manufacturing or managing that ultimate consumer data than we are as utilities. It's not a skill set that we really have is to go beyond that. Then I hear other CEOs say, I'm giving up my customer over my dead body. And I think that's the conundrum is and it is a regulatory compact issue, I think. Our regulators are going to get comfortable with utilities being that involved in everybody's daily lives because there will be huge amounts of data available from those consumers in the future, like we talked about. You'll know every hour they spend on every appliance, so you'll be able to pump that information back to suppliers of appliances. Just like my Nest thermostat. It knows when I walk past that thermostat, right? Which is freaking me out when now Google knows when I'm on my computer and they know when I'm walking through the hallways of my home. I mean, literally that's true, right? And you're going to have that about your dishwasher and about how often you flush your toilets and how often you use your washer and your dryer. I mean, it's all going to be out there. And there's a huge data privacy issue, and I'm not sure utilities are geared to deal with a lot of that stuff, frankly. And so I think it's a whole new skill set that you're going to have ultimately to take care of that particular issue. So, look, the technology from our standpoint, it'll be there. I mean, we'll have the analytics capabilities, we'll have the software capabilities, we'll have the hardware capabilities. That won't be the issue. I think the issue is how do you handle that legally, regulatorily? What are the responsibilities of the utility if they play that role? Now, having said all that, there's probably no better company in terms of trust to actually do that, depending on which utility you are. Some would argue their utility is not as trustworthy. Others argue that their utility is extremely trustworthy, and so that'll be a part of that is who do you trust more? Do you trust your local utility or do you trust Google to monitor your information? I mean, that's going to be the conundrum, frankly, and so those are issues I think that have to be addressed.
I would just beg to differ on that. I think that if you look up in the Webster's dictionary, the word electric utility is synonymous with trust.
And that's been a recent event in some cases, but that's a good thing.
I want to go back to social media and customer segmentation. that's a whole new world for the electric utility industry. The whole notion of using your apps and social media, as you said, my sons are much more facile at that than I am. But how do you all see that driving change in terms of our service and the way we serve our customers?
I think it definitely is something the utilities need to think about. These are capabilities that have been developed on the consumer web over the past decade, I would say. And so if you look at Yahoo and Google and Twitter and Amazon, they are basically looking at buying habits and analyzing that and dynamically segmenting customers and then proposing the right products and services to those customers. And there's no reason why the utility shouldn't be doing exactly that. And the technologies that we're leveraging underneath C3 are cloud scale, data analytics, but importantly there's a capability called machine learning, which allows us to learn from the data, so that when you're looking at consumer habits, it's not static customer segments; they're actually dynamic. And so we can really target the exact product and service related to energy services directly to that consumer, and do it on the basis of dynamic customer segmentation rather than very static segments, and engage the customer, because the customer's expecting it, right? So they are used to looking at Netflix and getting good recommendations for the next movie to watch, going to Amazon, looking at the next best book they ought to pick up. But they're expecting it, and they expect it from everyone: their telecommunications provider, their energy provider, bank, etc. And so I think this is something we ought to be, again, going long on in terms of how we engage the consumer, because they want it that way.
I think I'd start before the consumer is social business or social media. Every utility I talk to around the world right now is dealing with change management and aging workforce and knowledge management. There's a lot of change going on because everyone knows business models are going to shift. So there's a lot of questions of how does my workforce have to shift? How do I gain the knowledge out of the people that are going to retire in the coming years? So one of the first things with social media is, how do I use this collaboration and highly interactive model to collect information and to start really influencing the workforce? And then when you extend that out and start interacting with your client, you start learning about what you need to look like to serve your client. What are their opinions about you? What are their opinions about your service? You can try things and experiment and get very fast responses back to say, that campaign's not working. That way of providing service is not working. Integrate that feedback back into the company, and then use the internal social media mechanisms to actually start training the organization, to actually try to start instilling the kind of behaviors and ideas and the way that they communicate or do jobs. So I think it's fully encompassing. It's almost like a closed loop. And when you're in the business of customer services, listening to the customer, what they're saying about products and services that you're putting in the market, bringing that back inside the company and consuming that and saying, now how do we have to respond differently? How do we have to train differently? How do we need to use information to better serve them? So I think in the coming years, it's going to change the way companies work significantly. And I'm a baby boomer, and our whole company's moving to being a complete social business, the way our chairman is moving us. And it's absolutely painful. I hate it. I mean, I literally hate it. I can see my ratings as an executive in the company 2 years from now being how many likes I get on comments. So, but it's the reality. It's actually the reality of where we're moving, is this instantaneous feedback of what you're doing well and what you're not doing well. Is your thinking solid, or is your thinking not solid? And so I think we're going to have to get used to that environment, both in our companies and interacting with our clients the same way.
Yeah, social media is really interesting because it does have an internal company impact and a customer impact. And from an internal perspective, one of the important things you've got to build into all your technology these days is how do they react to social media. So in your outage management systems, for example. Social media is one of the best impacts or information impacts you get into your NMS and OMS systems. Reason is, a lot of times, and we learn this if there's anybody from Alabama Power in the room, I know we have some Georgia Power folks here, but when the tornadoes went through Tuscaloosa, Alabama and wiped out most of the infrastructure there, the only way you could actually communicate with some of those customers was on a text message, because texting requires less energy than other sources of communication. If you're not in the social media business, it's tough to communicate by text messages if you don't have the skill sets on your end to get those messages out. Within the company, it is right. If you don't think your group is in social media, you are, whether you're policing it or not. There's rogue Facebook pages out there. There's all kinds of things. They tweet each other about the boss's comments about the reviews. They know how much you make in almost instantaneously. It's a different world, and you have to manage that internally. And your IT applications or OT applications all have to be able to be smart media savvy. On the customer side, all of our solutions, as these guys do as well, now have interfaces for social media. You can't have a customer care and billing system that can't communicate through social media to the customers. You can't have most any system out there that touches either your workforce or your customer that doesn't have a social media component to it. What we've learned too is the way it affects our business is if we have an installation that goes bad, it goes viral instantaneously. Right? It's a nanosecond. I'm going to tweet my commissioner because my billing system isn't working exactly the way I thought it was supposed to work. I mean, and so you've got to be really sensitive to the communication efforts with your customers. Ratchet it way up. You have to communicate way early as you're changing your company to the customer and make sure they're not surprised, because a few bad tweets can turn into a few thousand bad tweets in a heartbeat. And so it's just a different way of thinking about your company. Thinking about your stakeholders, whether it's your commissioners, whether it's your customers, whether it's your stockholders who don't like the bad press generated on all the instantaneous media outlets that picked up the bad tweets that you're getting on a particular subject. So it's a hugely different world now, and you have to be sensitive to it. And if your management's not sensitive to it, you've got some major issues today.
Let me go back to something that you all touched upon. Over the last 6-8 months or so, you've seen a number of Wall Street analysts come out with very salacious headlines about utility death spiral. Utilities are in for a problem in the next 3 to 5 years. Obviously, that's got the industry's attention. It's got our company's attention. We're very involved with thinking through the utility of the future and working through what needs to happen as we move towards a company that provides products and services and just doesn't deliver electricity. You have a startup at the end, from C3, which kind of grew out of Cybele Systems and the great work that was done there. We have IBM, which is going through its transitions over the years, and Oracle. What could you share with us in terms of your experiences within your own companies as you move through that cycle of change, and what can we learn from you all as an industry collectively?
Yeah, I think in technology, things move incredibly rapidly, and so when we see trends, we have to jump on them very aggressively. And I started my career at Oracle in the mid '80s, and at the time relational databases were being introduced. Nobody imagined that they would be as successful as they are today. And so if you're still on hierarchical databases or network databases, those things have long gone. Then technology came around for graphical user interfaces in the '90s, and broad bandwidth communication, mobile computing, if you will. And we jumped on that at Cybele Systems to deliver sales automation capabilities so that mobile field forces could go out and engage customers and have data with them. We see a similar technology trend here, and one of the reasons we started C3 Energy was to take advantage of the big data, cloud computing, social media, and these mobile form factors that introduce new human computing interfaces, if you will. And so we're taking all of the innovation that's happened on the consumer web, technologies that underlie Twitter to handle 15 million messages per second or deliver billions of videos a month. We're applying those technologies to the power grid. And so we see this as an opportunity to really deliver transformational business models for the utilities. And we were talking a little bit about this earlier, but you just look at Europe as an evolution of a business model and see what we can learn from there, which is, the value of the generation assets are down, but there's a lot of opportunities for the utilities there in terms of revenue streams. We talked about them with the customer directly, energy services and products directly to the customer. They're going long on that. Distributed generation, going long on that, as well as large-scale renewables. And so those revenue streams will actually grow utilities in Europe. At least that's the strategy over time, and it's all underpinned by technology and the ability to take data from all these systems, analyze it the way Google analyzes data and the way Yahoo analyzes it and Amazon analyzes it, and deliver insights to the customer, deliver insights to grid operations, and all the way to generation. And I think that's the exciting opportunity ahead of us.
So it's really good to be critical infrastructure. So there was a time and day where IBM thought mainframes were critical infrastructure. And so there's a real danger when you have something that has been true for a long time. And so the first thing I'd say is when you get really comfortable in a certain place for a very long time, you have the risk of missing a big shift. And so what we're in fear of constantly as a company is missing a shift because we're comfortable where we are. And the longer as you're in a comfortable place, the more you don't hear, the term we use are wild ducks, but the divergent voices, the one that's sitting in the staff or executive committee meeting that's going, but this could happen. Everybody's going, no, it can never happen. These are the poor little guys in IBM that were going, they're only going to make 3 PCs, right? Back in the day when the PC industry was first starting. So I think first is don't miss big shifts. And when you're comfortable in space, even more, you should be listening to the voices that are different and that have different ideas and finding ways to weave that into the way you make decisions, the way you think about things. And we struggle with that constantly to allow those voices to be integrated in and heard. Then also building flexibility in the organization. If you're pretty sure change is coming, it takes a lot longer. I'm 20 plus years now with IBM, and it's a large organization, which most companies in this room are. It takes time to get people to behave differently. And so if you think change is coming, then you ought to start preparing your people as early as possible for a change and give them the tools to actually deal with that, because when you need speed, the people need to be prepared for speed, and we're struggling with that right now as a company. I can just be straightforward about that. Is we're in a major shift with the whole technology fabric really moving at the moment, and we need people to move really, really fast, and when people hadn't been told probably soon enough they needed to. And so those would be some just comments. That's not much about technology. It's more about people, but it's really the reality, and I think when you're dealing with change.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'm going to preface this by wearing my utility hat first and saying none of us up here are strategically important to the economies and the security of our communities and our states and our country as you guys are in the business you do if you work for utility. So everything I say, I preface with that, with the understanding that I know that it's a different business. However, having said that, we are slow to change in this industry, and it hurts us more than it helps us sometimes. Oracle started in 1977, I think it was. In fact, it started in this town, actually, because Larry Ellison's first job was for the U.S. government on a project that was called Oracle. That was the government name for it. And so there's a piece of party trivia for you, because that's how Oracle got its name back in 77. We were a database company in those days, and that's how we started. And there aren't too many companies who have computers out there, I don't care what kind of software you run, that don't run off an Oracle database, really, in most cases. But that didn't last that long in terms of being able to grow the business. One thing about being a publicly traded company where growth is the moniker for how well you do is you got to come up with new ideas on how to grow. So then it was, let's go and get in the apps business. In those days, it was custom apps more than anything else. And then you kind of played around with that and figured out, you know what, now people want apps that really don't just apply to everybody. They want apps specific to their industries. So we started industry verticals. And then, you know, as you go through that kind of thought process, then you decide, well, what other things do I need to be in? Well, maybe I need to be in hardware, and begin to provide a vertically integrated platform for the stuff that we sell on the top end with database and software and all those things. But the point is, I think we've done over 100 acquisitions since 1977, looking for places to grow the business. And one of the reasons I went to a company like Oracle was because, frankly, it's an exciting place to be. Nobody stands still for long if you do get run over. It's just a different atmosphere. And utilities, again, they have to adhere to that regulatory compact, because if you violate it, we end up in some of the places we are today. That's a whole different story. But given that, setting that aside, being able to adapt to change is critically important. And it starts with the leadership at the top. And I would argue, you know, when I was growing up in the utility business, we all felt really good if you got sent to Harvard or Yale or Stanford or one of those places. And that's not a bad thing to go for 90 days. But I got to tell you, that's not how you learn how business really functions. If I was running a utility today, I would say I want every executive that's going to be in a leadership position to go into a business outside of the utility world in a competitive arena for 2 years. It takes you 1 year to figure out what in the world's going on. It takes you 2 years to have any impact at all. And that would be in a cooperation with one of my suppliers, you know, but someone. You got to learn how to run a business from the perspective of what a competitive business is like when your life depends on your personal skills. There's no regulatory compact with revenue coming in and doing all those other things. And I don't mean to insult everybody, but it's different. And it was the biggest change I made in my career is when I stepped off of that utility platform that was a little bit safe and went out and said, the one way I survive is on my personal skills and the skills of the people that work for me. And a lot of utility executives today have come from other places, but many haven't, and a lot of your staff hasn't. So I would make that as a recommendation. And then just the change and the mindsets today of people, and how do you deal with change. And if they're not skilled in that, it does take a lot of time. It takes years to develop an organization that is comfortable with change. And you got to have to go through a few change cycles. But training your people on all the techniques of how do you manage in a changing environment, that takes a lot of investment. There aren't just programs you can send people to. It takes a lot of in-share investment, managing teams, putting people in positions, rotating them around. It's a much different environment. And people at Oracle do that exceptionally fast. That's the first thing I learned, is exceptionally fast. There was an interesting article, and I wish I brought it with me, and I don't, and I'll think about it. I'll get it on my computer after this is over if anybody's interested. There's an article that appeared in HBR maybe about a year ago now about the company of the future, and the article was something like this. Company environments will move so quickly you have to bifurcate your company, and you're going to have one group that worries about internal structure, CFO's office, legal, HR, the things you need to run a really good company. Then there's going to be a group that's split over here with strategy, sales, and marketing, and that's your growth engine. And if you start to mix those two up, it will overwhelm the new era executive. In Oracle, we did split ourselves that way. So Safra Katz runs CFO's office and the internal part of the business, and Mark Hurd runs the external part of the business. And I think that has made us lighter in terms of quick reaction time. Lighter. People wonder how it works. It actually works very well, and it allows people who sell and market to sell and market, at least people who develop to develop, and people who run the back office do that. As an officer in a company, when you have to do all that at once in a changing world this fast, it's a very difficult job today, very difficult job. So from our perspective, that's just some of what we've kind of picked up.
I want to go back to this concept of lone executives. So I can sign up 20 PHI people for Oracle. How many for IBM?
If they're electrical engineers, as many as you can give.
I was going to say, we'll take 20 of the right folks.
All right.
I won't even ask you to buy anything if we can get the right ones.
Oh, did somebody write that down? I want to shift gears a little bit, talk about the regulatory environment. How much do your companies interact with our regulators or in the regulatory proceedings that we're involved with? I want to start with that simple question, and we're going to get more complex as we go along.
By the way, in terms of the number of people that we'd take, we'd work with as many as you can give us, Kevin. Just to go back to that,
Sounds good.
we design all our products in conjunction with with customers, and so we learned a lot about the industry. We're essentially technologists, people who understand how to design, develop, and deliver products, and we work collaboratively with customers to do exactly that. But in terms of interacting and engaging the regulators, we only do that in conjunction with our customers, the direct customers, the utilities, and so to the extent that we're providing information that helps support cases, and I'll talk a little bit about that, then that we will do that. And one of the areas that we spent a lot of time on was what's the business value of this technology, and engaged McKinsey for a good 9 months, and basically went through the entire end-to-end process from generation analytics to transmission, distribution, engaging the customer in a lot of detail, and those are useful. Those are useful financial models, because we don't really do anything until there's a business case associated with the technology. And so, for advanced metering infrastructure, we know it's the benefit. It's anywhere from $50 to $70 per customer meter on average per year, and the range depends on the the region that we're deploying these systems to. But then we can break that down into non-technical loss is $15 per meter per year, outage analysis is $22 per meter per year per customer meter per year, etc. So those are kind of supporting facts that we engage our customers with to build business cases to deploy these technologies, and that's kind of the that's how we engage the utilities and the regulators, is to essentially make sure there's solid business cases behind anything that you do, and then the technology actually measures and has metrics associated with, well, if you're going to accomplish this non-technical loss parameter, or this technical loss business case, then you better be measuring at the field level and the management level, etc. These are the metrics to measure in order to make sure that you're tracking to it. So that's how we engage the utilities and the regulators.
So we do what I call regulatory influence a couple ways. At a federal or a national level, with like a Department of Energy, we talk about technology and how technology is shifting and what benefits that it could potentially create, right, for the electric industry or for the chemical and petroleum industry. Because the regulators and policymakers really need independent points of view, right, about what technology could do and examples of what it could do. And so we're very active in that domain to say, here's the benefit that this industry received, the telecommunication industry, by doing these things and using technology in this way, and it produced this value. So we work that way at a federal level or a national level, and we have a very systematic process. If it's at a state jurisdiction level or a province or whatever it is, depending on the part of the world you're living in, that's done completely in conjunction with the utility company. And that's done to support a project or an initiative, or to address national fundings like the ARA funds. When they were led, we worked very closely with utility companies on how they filed for those funds, right? But we play a supportive role, one of providing information, the main that we understand, which is information technology, which is where we try to stick to. We don't want to be a utility company, we're an information technology company. And so we provide information from that perspective. But we think it's a big part of our job is to partner with our utility clients around the regulatory aspects of their business, but again, as a supporting function.
Yeah, and I think we're similar to that. We do go in and talk to the FERC and DOE and other organizations to support this industry, like EPRI, because they're interested in our thoughts, and a lot of them run our databases, and they want access to some of our database information, et cetera. So from that perspective, we do very similar things to what IBM does. We would never go to the regulator without the invitation of the utility. I mean, we just don't do that.
Good to hear that.
Yeah, probably business smart on our perspective. So that's a different perspective there. But I would say this: we probably need to change all that. I'm going to give you 2 quick examples. We talked about big data and analytics and things like that. But in today's regulatory environment, I would say there are a lot of utilities who, I'll use the word timid, are timid about actually boasting with regard to the benefits of analytics. And the reason, let me give you a real simple one. In a lot of jurisdictions around the country, if I have an analytic platform that'll tell me how much theft I got going on, there are very few utilities in some cases who want to go talk to the regulator about that or claim that because they get that covered in line loss calculations, right? So why slit my own throat? There are other, there's a recent article circulating around about voltage control and the impacts that could have. But if I don't get regulatory treatment at a local level for voltage control ideas, it could save a lot of generation on the tail end. Why should I do those types of things? And so I would actually propose that through the support of EEI, that we get the NARUC folks together, the utility people together, EEI, EPRI, organizations like that, along with some of the technology providers, and see if we can work on some of these issues, because those issues will get bigger as we go forward. It's going to require a different regulatory compact as we move forward than we have today to take the benefits of what the utility is going to be able to do but might be a little bit timid about doing in the current regulatory environment. It's just a different world. And I think the best way to handle that would be to bring those groups together in some dialogue and talk about that. Some of it's an accounting issue as well. We haven't talked about SaaS yet, but software as a service. In today's world, it reminds me of the IPP business when I was in it in 1981 and 82, when people wondered why IPP business didn't take off. And in those days, if you remember the accounting rules, you couldn't write off an IPP contract as a brick and mortar asset. So nobody was buying IPP because you couldn't take that contract. And yet, so I couldn't put it in rate base, right? Well, the minute those accounting rules were changed, I could put it in rate base, the IPP industry took off. And I was there in those days. I can remember that. We got the same issue with software as a service. Under today's accounting rules, most utilities would argue they can't take that as a rate-based asset. So you might continue to run less efficient operations in the home front and not take software as a service. And that's a shame, because you're going to continue to maintain more costly infrastructure you might need to if the accounting rules allowed you to take SaaS and actually capitalize it. So those are some things I think we could work on, regulators, industry experts, et cetera, to improve the way the business functions.
Well, if you go back to the earlier discussion, right, y'all are positing that your products can increase efficiency and decrease costs for the utility and therefore the customer. And I think you touched upon this, Roger, but our regulatory model is not set up to accommodate that, where the utility actually receives a return on that. Do you want to comment, and I know the next few panels are going to get into this, but from your perspective as technology providers, is that an impediment in your ability to roll technology out? Because the regulators in some cases won't allow for the utility to recover those costs on the one hand or recover a major margin on it in terms of that megawatt.
Yeah, I mean, it is clearly an important factor and consideration, and so utility models vary, as Roger pointed out, and in some cases there is a big focus on reducing. Take an example of non-technical loss or technical loss, and so it is governed somewhat by the regulatory framework, if you will. And so I do think that given the environment that there are, as I mentioned, significant benefits and value associated with the grid modernization and the information technology that we layer on top of it, and if there's incentives for the utilities to do so, then I think everybody will do the right thing by the customer, by the regulator, by the utility, and so I do think it's an important consideration, Kevin. Yeah.
I mean, the whole compute model's changing, and so the innovation is going to be done on the cloud. The new startups are not going to build their own infrastructure. They're going to build on a cloud because it doesn't cost them as much. The tools are going to be there. We just announced that we were putting up pretty much our whole middleware portfolio in the cloud and allowing access to developers. And so if utilities are going to be able to take advantage of this new compute paradigm and innovation in it, then the regulatory construct's going to have to follow it and allow you to recover in your rate base buying goods and services off of a service-based environment, right, that's built on a cloud. Now, whether that's public or private, and you get into security and privacy issues, those can be worked through. But I think the beginning part is, if that's where innovation is going to happen, I think most regulators would want utilities to innovate and lower costs and improve service and reliability. And a lot of that's going to happen in that development environment. So I think it's probably going to be a necessary change that's going to have to occur given the way the industry is moving.
Yeah, I'll sit real close to you when I say absolutely. Is that? I think, it's got to change. The industry is changing, and some of the old regulatory paradigms just won't work in the new world. And again, I would suggest an open dialogue to resolve some of those questions. And it's not just the regulatory issues, but it is accounting questions and things that we struggled back in the IPP days with and finally got resolved. And this is just one of those same things. It's a new world. You want to incent the right behavior. But you're going to have to do things differently in the future than we have in the past in terms of regulatory incentive.
Just want to follow up on your comment about the cloud and the use of big data. The industry led by EEI and my boss and chairman and CEO Joe Rigby has been out in front and very proactive on cybersecurity. And it's a very, very big deal to our industry. And particularly to our company, given we serve the nation's capital. It's something that's top of mind for senior management, top of mind for our board. We're in major dialogue with our regulators and with Tom Kuhn at EEI about changes, with the federal government and their thinking on it. We're moving everything to the cloud, it sounds like. Help me understand how that meshes with a cybersecurity defense wherein all of our big data, if you will, and secure data is now taken and put on a cloud.
I guess I'll say something controversial. It might actually be more secure in the cloud. CNSA for details,
They're
I
here.
borrowed.
But believe me, they're here.
I think they're here, but
somebody here is.
I think these things, are pretty problematic, right? But I can't get to this on Amazon, right? I can't stick this into a computer drive somewhere. But there are different flavors of cloud computing. There, certainly a lot of the work that happens on Amazon in the for intelligence is virtual private clouds. Secure virtual private clouds, and the benefits of cloud is concept of elasticity, which is if you need to process billions of rows of data or petabytes of data as we do today, you can just spool that up automatically and spool it back down very cost effectively, I would say. And so. And then there are other clouds which are private clouds, and a private cloud has similar characteristics to the public cloud, if you will, but can be actually behind your firewall. And so, I think it's important to recognize the flavors of cloud, I guess, and kind of recognize it's there'll be some processes which public clouds will service very well. And then others that might need private clouds associated with them. So that's some background on that.
So I think exactly right. Is most people when they think cloud think consumer and public, and there are a lot of varieties. So I think that's the starting point. But I think it's going to be really important as we move to a new computing paradigm is to build with cybersecurity in mind from the ground up. A lot of things, how it gets driven by the market is by the consumer, right? So the way the business model is developed, the way the technology is developed is to serve the consumer, not necessarily the enterprise, not business to business. It's built for B2C, That's where the cloud's teeth have been cut, is serving the consumer, whether it's Apple's or Amazon's or whatever it happens to be, is that consumer market. So what is going to be very important is this technology builds out, is that the business to business is thought of very clearly with the type of privacy and security that's necessary to meet audit requirements and national requirements. So I think that's work for us to do as an industry, and I think everyone here is doing that kind of work, but building for that environment so that everyone can take advantage of the innovation, accessibility, and cost, mitigation that's available there. So I think that's something we as an industry need to do, and that we also need very close participants with the electric industry and fully understanding the implications of NIST and how we build that into our systems. And I think that's a requirement on our side, is that we understand those requirements and that we can prove very clearly how we're addressing that, right? So that you have a comfort level in using that technology. So I think that a lot of that requirement resides with us in how we develop these offerings and systems.
So at the risk of being a little edgy, let me just respond real quickly to that. And I would say this, I wouldn't think of calling anybody else when my power's not working properly than my local utility. And I'm not sure utilities ought to be thinking about anybody else except people that know how to manage data to fix some of their data problems. And I'll just, look, when the U.S. government gets in trouble on a data issue, they call Oracle and IBM. That's where they go. I mean, when the rollout didn't work well, I got news for you. They called us. We know how to manage data. That's what we do for a living. When the states got in trouble, they called Oracle people. I mean, that's who they call. We know how to manage data. That's what we do for a living. We know about data security. We know how to manage data security. That's what we do for a living. We've done it for the government forever. We've done it for a lot of companies, banking, healthcare. We can do it for utilities. We're deeply involved with all the discussions going on here in Washington about data security at every single level. I talk to people in Oracle who I know I'm talking to folks who I don't know their first name. They tell me a name, but I know it's not really their first name. That's the level we're involved. We know how data security functions in our business, okay? Larry, I know his real name.
I hope not.
But it's a different world, and you shouldn't assume we're not on top of data security, because we are. The solutions we design are built with data security in mind. We know how data security could function. And as these guys both said, you can do a cloud behind your own firewall. You can do a cloud that's more public than that. But your consumer customers are going to demand it because they're getting it from their other service providers. And everybody talks about the Internet of Things, right? Well, that's going to hit the utility business because data is going to be managed centrally, and people are going to want to connect their devices into your utility to figure out whatever it is they want to know about. New hookup time, outage time, bill costs, bill questions, and they're going to do it from a myriad of different devices. And oh, by the way, your internal workforce is as well. So knowing how to manage this data, again, this is something we ought to talk about as an industry, because we know how to manage data. We know how to secure data. It's going to be, and I would argue this as well, it's not nearly as big an issue as the industry has with the fact that physical security, with the fact that nuclear parts aren't made in this country anymore, wire and cable and transformers aren't made in this country anymore. I mean, compared to that issue, our issue around data security, frankly, is an easy one to resolve. Physical security will be even tougher. So, trust me, we can get you there on data security.
So back to my definition from the dictionary, electric utility equals trust.
Yes.
You're telling me that data equals trust with you guys.
You ought to have some faith.
Okay. All right. Well, we got faith in this industry. I want to thank the panel. Really appreciate your comments, and look forward to discussion going forward.